Today, I want to talk about the process of first draft planning, specifically as it relates to trying to map out a tentative but strong story structure early on. Now, the issue is that story never comes to us initially in its full form. Generally, we start with an image, an idea, a theme, a character doing something, or perhaps a couple of characters in a bit of a bind. And this is often all we have to start with. This, of course, isn't enough to create a strong story. It's just a fragment. So from this fragment, we need to create an idea around it. And then once we have a vague idea of what we want to tell a story about, we can start to put up the scaffolding to see if we can turn our idea not only into a full story, but also a great story. Now, the problem is that there's no one-size-fits-all solution to what makes a great story. However, at the same time, there are a set of underlying elements that are present in most great stories. So, for example, craft elements like character, arc, goal, conflict, act separation, character flaw, and so on, all weave their way in and out of a story in a natural and organic way so that the craft element essentially is invisible and kind of exists below the surface. Now, when these elements draw attention to themselves, the audience is pulled out of the imaginary world and the illusion of the story is broken. But if we look close enough, a lot of the best stories share very similar traits. Not always in the same order, not always in the same shape or intensity, but they are there and just molded a bit differently. Now, to make matters more complicated, the narrative elements that the storyteller uses to tell their story might be different based on if you're writing a contemporary commercial novel versus if you're writing surrealist fiction. Now, these creators will not only pick different tools from the writer's toolshed, but what they shape with those tools will be fundamentally different. And this difference is a big part of what makes writing and reading so much fun. There essentially is an endless array of creative possibilities. But again, if you look deep enough below the surface of any great novel, you'll find meticulously crafted narratives. They are not haphazardly or accidentally designed. Well, not by the time they get to the final draft anyway. So for example, if we look at the craft element of character arc, this is the character journey that the audience has kind of signed up to go on the ride for. They want to know where you're bringing your character. So when thinking about your first draft, at this point you only have generally a vague idea of what you want to write about. So how do you even start thinking about these craft elements like arc? Or what about subplots? In most fiction, the main plot line won't be enough to keep the reader's attention from start to finish. So many secondary characters have their own associated subplot stories with their own story arc. Now, from a structure standpoint, we have essentially arcs inside of arcs inside of arcs. To complicate matters further, we have to think about our centerpiece scenes that are most important for our plot to work. Our secondary characters, our antagonistic force, our reversals, our big reveals, our plot twists, how characters speak, the voice they speak in, and so on. With writing, the complicated part is that not only do you need to consider all of these elements, which is a lot to keep in your head in the first place, but all of these little parts need to weave in and out and feed off each other naturally in a way that strengthens your overall story. To put it lightly, pre-writing work or first draft planning or just story planning in general is a tough and complicated puzzle to crack. So what we've done over at Scribble is that we've created a key steps worksheet that consists of a logical series of questions that allow you to take a vague idea that you have in your mind and shape it into something that is not only coherent, but is also a strong story. So in Scribble, if I was on my main book page here, I could just click on any book that I'm working on, and then over in the right, you'll see a link for Storybase. Now on this page, you'll see a tab for Key Steps Worksheet. So you can click on that now. And again, if you don't have a Scribble account, a link to Scribble can be found below so you can start following along. But essentially what we have here is we have a series of questions broken up into acts. Here you'll see Act 1, Act 2A, Act 2B, and Act 3. Now we've designed this worksheet to act as a sort of controlled brainstorming session. The idea isn't just to throw out any random idea that comes to mind, but instead to force you to start thinking creatively about the shape of your story. So for example, if we look at Act 1, you'll be asked questions about what your character's weaknesses are. Not only will we ask you to identify a possible weakness, but also to conceptualize scenes where you could communicate that weakness to your audience through some type of character action. So here you can just play around and audition different weaknesses. You're not committing to anything here. You're just workshopping your idea. You're playing with it in your hands and trying to get it to fit into some type of form. Now, if we scroll down further, you'll be asked to start thinking about your character arc and planning out scenes that show that arc in motion. Further down, we'll look at character want, need, their ordinary world. Now notice we've highlighted centerpiece scenes here in yellow. Now these are really your main plot points in a kind of traditional storytelling sense. So for example, your inciting incidents, your plot points, pinch points, your climax, and so on. Now we understand that while most stories will have these main kind of tentpole scenes, not all stories will, and that's fine. At Scribble, we don't want to strong arm you into any one writing paradigm, and we definitely don't want to strong arm you into a specific narrative template. There are a lot of different writing guides on the market that promote a specific way of looking at story structure, but there is no one formula that works perfect all of the time. So we wanted to make this story worksheet flexible enough to work with any story structure paradigm that you're currently working with. These questions are only meant to get you to think about your story. They are not meant to try to lock you into a certain structure. They're meant to get your creative juices flowing so that you can start to unlock your story for yourself. You likely won't use everything you come up with when filling out this worksheet, but answering one question might lead you to think about your protagonist or their problem or their goal in a different light. And best of all, the ideas you come up with can be used as scenes. So sometimes we might ask you to map out your character's main dilemma, or we might ask you to sketch out a possible subplot story early on. In this section here, notice we get less specific and we ask you just to plan out a sequential list of growing obstacles in a linear way. This happens, which causes this to happen, which causes this to happen, and so on. So the worksheet is organized from your first act to your last act, but it also uses a mix of general and specific questions to help you fill in the gaps. We also spend a lot of time asking questions about your second act, since this is where many writers get lost. By mapping out some tentative scenes here, you're giving yourself writer's block help before you ever start writing and actually need writer's block help. Now, remember, this is all just part of your pre-writing work. You don't have to commit to anything here. However, when writing your actual novel, when you get to your second act, if you do get lost, you could always just come back to this worksheet and look over some of the ideas that you came up with during your pre-writing process. Perhaps you got off course somewhere, or maybe by the time you get to your second act, you've rethought your plot structure. That's okay. You can just delete what you had before and enter in new ideas here. Now, there are too many questions to go over in detail here. In fact, currently there are 115 questions to answer, but I encourage you to go and check out Scribble to see if this tool can help you transform that vague idea of a story that you have in your head into something much more fleshed out and complete. Essentially, this worksheet was designed to help you wrestle your story to the ground so you could get a better sense of what story you're trying to tell and how you're going to tell it. Again, a link to Scribble can be found below. So that's all I have for you today. Thanks for stopping by, and don't forget to like and subscribe as we publish new resources for writers regularly.